The first thing my son said to me after 15 years of silence was, "Mama, the place looks smaller than I remember." He was looking at the for sale sign at the end of the gravel road when he said it, not at me, not at my face, which had gone 15 years older waiting for him. At the sign, at the number the realtor had stapled to the bottom of it. I drove a school bus through the Nebraska sandhills for 30 years. And if there is one thing that work teaches you, it is the difference between the sound a child makes when they are glad to see you and the sound they make when they want something. My own boy forgot I would know that sound anywhere, in any voice, at any age. He pulled into my yard with his arm out the window and his smile turned up bright, and I knew before he got the truck in park which sound it was. What I did about it took most of a season, and it is not the thing you would expect from a lonesome old woman who had prayed for that truck to come up her road every single day for 15 years. This is the story of the summer my son came home, and what it cost the both of us that he came home for the wrong reason. My name is Maybelle Crowder. I am 64 years old, and I live near a town so small in the Nebraska sandhills that the welcome sign and the leaving sign are nailed to the same post. I married Cal Crowder when I was 20, on the home place his grandfather proved up out of nothing but grass and grit. A quarter section with a white house and a barn going grey, and a windmill that has been singing the same 2 notes since before I was born. Cal ranched it. I drove bus number 7, picking up other people's children in the cold dark, and getting every last one of them home safe for 30 years. Cal passed 3 winters ago, in his chair, with his coffee still warm on the table beside him. I found him there in the morning, with the radio still going. After 50-some years, a house gets very large and very quiet all at once. Here is what I need you to hold on to, and I will only point at it the one time. 30 years on that bus, I learned to read a child's whole week off their face in the 4 seconds it took them to climb the steps. Who'd been crying in their room the night before? Who hadn't had breakfast? Who was telling me the truth about the permission slip? And who was working an angle? They forgot I could still do that. I never forgot. Tuck that away, because it is the floor this whole story is built on. Let me give you one for instance, so you'll know I'm not just an old woman flattering herself. There was a boy on my route years back, 3rd grade, named P.T. Halverson, who climbed my steps one January morning, grinning ear to ear, lunchbox swinging, telling everybody good morning. And I took one look at that grin and pulled the bus over to the shoulder and asked him, quiet, to come sit up front with me. The grin was on too tight. The eyes behind it were somewhere else entirely. Took me half the route, but he finally told me they'd been hollering at his house the night before. The bad kind. And he hadn't slept. And he was smiling so hard because he was scared if he stopped, he'd cry in front of the big kids. I got the right people looking in on that family by noon. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes makes a sound, if you've spent enough mornings listening for it. Hold on to P.T. Halverson. He comes back, in a manner of speaking, 15 years and a grown man later. In my own front yard. Now let me tell you about my Lonnie before I tell you what he did, because I am his mother, and a mother does not get to tell only the ugly half and call it the truth. Lonnie came late to us, after years of Cal and me lying awake thinking we'd never have one at all. He was the most wanted child in 3 counties. As a little boy, he'd ride the route with me some summer mornings, sitting up in the big seat behind me, narrating the cattle in the pastures like a baseball announcer, telling me which black baldy was winning. He had a tender heart back then. He'd cry if we passed a calf stuck in a fence. I have to believe that boy is still in there, somewhere, under whatever grew over him. Because the other possibility is more than I am willing to carry to my grave. Cal raised him hard, the way his own father had raised him, which is to say, with love, he could fix offense with, but never quite say out loud. I was the soft place. That was our arrangement, Cal and me. And it worked until the day it didn't. What went wrong between the two of them, and I was caught square in the middle, the way mothers always are. When Lonnie was in his 20s, he got into a venture out in Denver. Some land-flipping scheme with a smooth man Cal never trusted for a minute. And when it went under, he came back to the ranch wanting money. Real money. The kind you only get around here by selling cattle a man spent his whole life building up out of nothing. Cal said no. He said it the way Cal said everything, like a gate slamming. And the two of them stood out in the machine shed in the cold and said the kind of things to each other that cannot ever be fully taken back. Lonnie wanted me to go behind Cal's back and move money I didn't even think was mine to move. I wouldn't do it. And that, in my son's eyes, was the unforgivable thing. On his way to the truck, he turned around and said to me, "You always pick him. Even now, you pick him." And then he got in and drove down that gravel road. And the silence he left behind lasted 15 years. I wrote him the whole time. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, cards for no reason at all, just so he'd have my handwriting in his mailbox. The first few came back marked "no longer at this address." Then they stopped coming back. But they were never answered either, which is somehow worse, because then you lie awake wondering if they were even opened or just dropped in a drawer. He married a woman named Dana. I have met exactly twice in my life. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, a girl and a boy. I knew only from a photo card the first couple of Christmases, and then not even that. When Cal died, Lonnie did not come. He sent flowers, white ones, store arranged, with a card that read, in someone else's handwriting, "Sorry for your loss, Lonnie." Sorry for your loss. As though I had misplaced his father somewhere, like a glove left on the bus. If you have ever loved somebody who simply stopped letting you love them, then you already understand the particular ache I carried into that big, quiet house every single night. And you understand exactly why a part of me lit up like dry grass in August the morning his truck finally came up my road. No matter what 30 years of reading children was trying to whisper in my ear. Sit with me a minute on that, because I know some of you are carrying your own silence with somebody right now. A child or a parent out there on the far side of 15 years. And I'd count it a kindness to know where you're listening from tonight. But let me get back to it, because the first wrong note had already been struck, and I heard it even with my arms wrapped around my son's neck. The reason that truck came up my road, of course, was the sign. I had finally gone and done the thing I swore on Cal's grave I'd never do. At 64, with 2 shoulders that won't lift a saddle anymore, and no Cal to run the place beside me, I had let the home quarter go up for sale. The grass alone, in this country, with what land has climbed to, was going to bring more money than Cal and I had laid eyes on in our whole lives put together. I cried the day I called the realtor. I sat in Cal's chair and asked him to forgive me, and the windmill sang its 2 notes outside like it always has. The sign went up on a Thursday. Lonnie's truck came up the road the following Tuesday. You can do that arithmetic as easy as I did. Lying awake that first night with 30 years of bus driving on one side of me and a mother's stubborn hope on the other. Thursday to Tuesday, 5 days. Hope told me it was a coincidence. The bus driver knew better and said nothing and waited. He was wonderful those first few weeks. I will be fair to him, because being fair is the one dignity nobody can pry out of your hands. He fixed the sagging yard gate I'd been after for 2 years. He greased the windmill so it ran quieter. He brought the grandchildren out. Shelby, who is 16 and quiet as a held breath, and little Bryce, who is 9 and has not stopped talking since the day he learned how. Watching those two walk under Cal's cottonwoods, the trees their great-grandfather planted, hearing Bryce ask 100 questions and Shelby touch the bark like it might know her, gave me a joy I will not stand here and pretend I didn't feel, clear down to the bone. There was a night Lonnie sat at my kitchen table and his eyes filled up and he said, "I should have come when Dad died. I'll regret that until the day I die myself." And I believed him. I still believe that part, even now. A man can mean the tears and mean the angle at the very same time. I have come to think that is mostly how the people who love you break your heart. Not with a clean lie, with a true thing wrapped so tight around a false one that you cannot, for the life of you, pull the two apart. There was an evening in that stretch I keep turning over, because it was real, whatever else was. Bryce talked me into ringing the old iron dinner bell off the back porch, the one Cal's mother hung there, and the sound of it rolled out across the grass the way it used to when I'd call Cal in from the south pasture for supper. And Shelby, my quiet one, came and stood next to me at the rail without a word and just leaned her head on my shoulder, light as a bird landing, and watched the sun go down red over the hills. Lonnie was in the yard tossing a ball with his boy, and for about 10 minutes, the 4 of us were exactly the family I had been writing cards to for 15 years. I let myself have those 10 minutes. I'm glad I did. A person should be allowed to keep the real moments, even after they learn what was wrapped around them. That evening was true. The reason it was happening in my yard that particular week was not. Both of those things get to live in me at once. And I have made my peace with that. The first wrong note came over pie. We were at the table talking about the closing, and Lonnie set down his fork, and he said, "Easy as you please. You know, Mama, you really shouldn't have to handle all this alone. The paperwork, the money, the bank, all of it. Let me get added as a signer on your account, just so I can help you. So nobody comes along and takes advantage of you. So nobody takes advantage of you." He looked me dead in the eye when he said it, which is the very thing a man does when he is hoping with all his might that you will not look back at him too hard. I have to be honest with you here, because I promised I'd tell this straight and not paint myself braver than I stood. You have to understand what those 15 years had done to my evenings. I'd set one plate at the table out of 50 years of habit and then put it back. I'd talk to Cal's chair. I'd save up little things all day to tell somebody and then have nobody to tell them to. So I'd tell the windmill. The radio in that house ran from dawn to dark, just so there'd be a voice in the rooms. When you have lived that way long enough, a warm body at your supper table is not a luxury. It is water in a dry year. So when Lonnie offered to come close, to handle things, to stay, the thirst in me stood up and answered before my good sense could get its boots on. I nearly said yes. I was so lonely, and he was so warm, and the wanting to believe in me was hollering so loud that I came within one breath of handing my boy the key to everything I had left in this world, just to keep him at my table one more week. If you have ever been alone long enough, you know that loneliness will stand right up and argue against your own good sense. and it will very nearly win the argument. It is the most expensive feeling there is, and the people who mean you harm can always smell it on you. But I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no either. I said, "Let me think on it, honey." And I watched something cross his face. A flicker of frustration there and gone, smoothed over fast as a hand wiping a table. That flicker is the thing that finally sat the bus driver back down behind the wheel. It went on from there the way these things always do. One reasonable-sounding step at a time, each one no worse than the last, until you add them all up. Dana started telephoning, sweet as store-bought cake, asking how the sale was coming along, when the closing might land, whether I'd given any more thought to simplifying things at my age. Lonnie began talking about a bridge. Just a little bridge, he said, 20,000 or so against the coming sale, to get them over a rough patch with his own business out west. He never once said the word debt. People in trouble almost never do. They say bridge and rough patch and getting square. He took to leaving brochures on my counter for a 55 and over place in town, and the little price printed in the corner of those brochures told me, plain as a bank statement, exactly how much my son figured I ought to keep for myself, and exactly how much he was already spending in his head. There was a supper too, the one time Dana came out with him, that told me more than she meant it to. She spent the meal correcting me, gentle, always smiling, but correcting. "No, Maybelle, you already told us that story. Are you sure you turned the stove off, hun? You seem a little scattered tonight." "Lonnie, did you notice how she repeated herself?" I had not repeated myself. I had not left the stove on. But I watched her lay those little stones down one at a time, building a path toward a place where a forgetful old woman couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. And I understood that the road they were paving had a name on the far end of it, and the name was not mine anymore. I had filed enough of other people's hard family business in my head over 30 years to know precisely what it looks like when somebody starts assembling the case that you are not all there. It looks like concern. It always looks like concern. I kept thinking I was wrong about him. That is the thing I want you to understand, because it is the trap every loving person walks into. Every warm supper, every fixed gate, every minute of Bryce's chatter and Shelby's quiet company. I'd think, "You old fool, you've gone bitter. This is your son, and he loves you, and you're reading angles into a man just trying to come home." Hope kept handing me reasons. And then came the night that took the last of my hope and set it down gently and turned out the light on it for good. I was out on the porch in the dark, the way I sit most nights because the house behind me is too loud with quiet. Lonnie was around the side of the house by his truck, on the telephone, and the sandhills carry a voice at night, the way still water carries it across a lake. I wasn't trying to listen. I didn't have to try. I heard my son say, low and tired, with no music in it at all, to whoever was on the other end of that line, I know. Soon as the old lady's place closes, we're square. Couple more weeks. I'm handling her. Yeah, I've about got her there. I'm handling her. The old lady. I sat very still in my chair in the dark and let those few words go all the way down to the bottom of me. Past the hope. Past 15 years of cards in the mailbox. All the way to the floor. And when they hit the floor, the strangest thing came over me. I did not cry. I felt the old bus settle under me on a cold morning, both my hands coming to rest at 10 and 2. 30 years of knowing precisely what I was looking at. I had read children my whole working life. I had simply been refusing, for 15 lonesome years, to read my own. So let me tell you what I did, and I'll tell it plain, because the woman Lonnie was counting on was a sad old thing who would either hand it all over out of hope or come apart at the seams out of grief and let him scoop up the pieces. I was not going to be either one. I gave him a test. I want to be careful with that word. A trap is a thing you set to catch somebody and punish them. A test is a thing you set to find out the truth, so you can stop guessing. I needed to know, for dead certain, whether my son had come up that gravel road for his mother or for his mother's land. And I had lived long enough to know there is only one way on God's earth to know that for sure. You quietly take the land clean off the table, and then you stand back and you watch which direction the man walks. I drove out to where they were staying the next afternoon, and I sat down at the table, and I told my son a story that was almost entirely true. I told him I'd been praying on it hard, and that the more I prayed, the more I knew I could not bear to let Cal's grass go to strangers after all. I told him I'd decided to take the place off the market and deed the whole quarter into a trust, tied to the local school, so it would stay grass forever, the way Cal would have wanted, and that there wasn't going to be any big check at the end of it, just a small amount set by for me to live quiet in town. Then I folded my hands on that table, and I watched my boy's face the same exact way I used to watch a child come up the steps of bus number 7. And I saw the precise second the warmth went out of it, like the shadow of a cloud sliding across a hill of grass on a bright day. There and then gone, and cold behind it. He covered fast, I'll grant him that. He was always quick. "Mama, are you sure? That seems awful hasty. Have you even talked to a lawyer? You don't want to go making a permanent decision while you're still grieving Dad." But the engine under his concern had changed. I could hear it idling different. He left earlier than usual that day, said he had calls to make. He did not bring the grandchildren back that weekend, nor the next one, nor the one after that. I am going to tell you about the part that very nearly broke me clean in half. Because if I leave it out, then I'm not telling you the truth. And a story that skips over the cost is just a person bragging. For about 10 days after I set that test, I let myself hope I'd gotten it wrong. That is the cruelest trick hope plays on a body. It does not die clean and quick. It dies slow, and it begs the whole way down. I'm ashamed to tell you that during those 10 days, I bought the good coffee, the kind in the gold bag that Cal liked, and set it on the shelf for when Lonnie came back around. I dusted off the second porch chair. I left the porch light burning past my bedtime, the way you do for a child who is out later than they said. Even though my child was a grown man, 2 hours gone and 40 years old. Every set of headlights that slowed on the road out front, my heart would climb right up into my throat and sit there. None of them turned in. The good coffee sat on that shelf until the bag went stale, and I threw it out. And that small thing, that gold bag in the trash, is somehow the part I cried over hardest in this whole business. Lonnie telephoned once during those 10 days, and for one shining minute I sat up straight and thought, there now, he's calling just to talk, just to hear his mother's voice. You were unfair to him, and your boy loves you after all. He asked how I was keeping. He told me Bryce lost a tooth and asked me to guess which one. We laughed. My whole chest filled up like a dry creek bed in a spring rain. And then, right at the end, just before he said goodbye, easy and offhand, like he'd only just thought of it, he said, "Hey, you ever circle back around on that trust idea? I'd just hate to see you lock something up you can't ever undo." And the creek went dry between one heartbeat and the next. He had not called to hear my voice. He had called to check on his investment, and my voice was just the hold music. I sat there with the dead phone in my hand a long, long while, out on the porch, while the windmill sang its 2 notes. That was the price of knowing for certain. I paid it in full, and I would pay it again tomorrow, because a clear, hard truth is worth more than a sweet, soft lie you have to keep getting up in the night to feed. After that, the silence came back down over us. The very same silence as the 15 years. And this time, I understood it for exactly what it had always been. It was never about Cal. It was never about me picking his father's side in a cold machine shed. It was about whether there was anything in it for him. When the answer turned to no, my son went away again as easy as he had come. And he did not yet know that in going, he had handed me everything I needed to decide where every last dollar of Cal's land was going to go. Because the sale was real, the trust story was the test, but that for sale sign was the truth. And that fall, the home, quarter, sold to a young couple from 2 counties over, a husband and wife not yet 30, who actually wept at the closing table, who held my hands and promised me they'd keep Cal's cottonwoods standing and his cattle on the grass. The check, when it came, was every bit as big as Cal, and I had never once let ourselves dream out loud. And I sat down in town with a lawyer, a sharp and decent woman named Pat Engebretson, who does not waste a word. And I made certain that money went where it honored what Cal and I had spent our lives building, and nowhere at all that it would go to feeding a lie. I set up a trust for my grandchildren, for Shelby and for Bryce, for their schooling and their start in life, with not one single dollar of it ever passing through their father's hands. Whatever Lonnie had become, those 2 children never did me one wrong. And the sins of a parent are not a debt you are allowed to collect off the young. I put a good piece of it into a scholarship in Cal's name down at the school, for ranch kids and for the children who used to ride my bus, so that some 14-year-old out on a gravel road who believes the whole entire world is only 40 miles across might one day get to find out just how big it truly is. And I kept enough to live on, small and warm, entirely my own, in a little white house in town with a porch that faces straight west into the sunset. I was not entirely without somebody in my corner through all of it, and I'd be remiss not to tell you about her, because she is the reason I keep faith that family is partly a thing you choose. My friend Arlene has known me since we were girls in pigtails at the same country school. She runs the cafe in town now, and the day Lonnie's truck first came up my road, Arlene was the one I called. She listened to the whole bright, happy report of it, every fixed gate and every grandchild, and then she was quiet a second too long, and she said, "Maybelle, I'm glad for you. I truly am. Just keep one foot on the ground for me, would you?" She didn't say what she suspected. She didn't have to. A true friend doesn't tell you you're a fool for hoping. She just stands close by with both her arms out, in case the hoping drops you. When the silence came back over me that fall, Arlene was on my porch the next morning with coffee and a coffee cake and no questions. And she has been at my elbow every hard day since. I have learned that in the very worst stretch of a thing, sometimes the whole of your rescue is one stubborn old girl who has loved you since 1968 and refuses to let you sit alone in it. Then I did the last hard thing on the list. I drove back out to where Lonnie was, before he left the state again, and I told him to his face, calm, no tremble anywhere in it, in the bus voice, the one that 30 years of children never once managed to talk over. I said, I heard you, son. That night by your truck. I heard you call your mother the old lady you were handling. His face did a dozen things in a row, none of them all the way honest. I held up my hand before he could start. I said, now you hear me, because I am only going to say this the once, and then I am going to let you go on. I would have given you the land. Do you understand what I am telling you? If you had driven up my road and put your arms around me and never said one word about money, I would have signed that whole place over to you and counted myself the luckiest mother in Nebraska. All you ever had to do was want me. Just your mama. No land attached. That was the entire price, and you could not bring yourself to pay it. He cried then, real crying, I do believe, at last, with nothing wrapped around it and nothing to gain. He said he was sorry, that he was in over his head, that Dana had been pushing hard, that he had told himself coming back and needing help weren't really so far apart. And maybe that last part is even half true. I let him say the whole of it, and when he was done, I told him the thing I had settled on in the truck on the drive over, which is the very thing I most want to leave with you tonight. I said, I am not going to hate you, Lonnie. I am too old for it, and I love you too much. And hate is just one more thing that would eat me from the inside while you slept fine. But you do not get to handle me. Not ever again as long as I live. The door to my heart is standing open, the way it always has and always will. You can only ever come through it with your hands empty. The day you want nothing on this earth from me but me, you come find your mother. And I will have the coffee on and a chair pulled out. Until that day comes. God keep you and the children safe. Then I drove home to my little porch in town, and I did not feel one bit like I had won anything. Because the truth is, you do not win these. There is no winning. There is only keeping your dignity, and keeping your money out of the fire, and keeping your own heart from going hard and bitter as a winter clod. And that is the only kind of winning left to a mother who finds herself in a story like mine. There is one more thing, and it has turned out to be the thing that matters most of all. About a month after Lonnie left the state, my telephone rang, and it was Shelby, my quiet granddaughter. Held breath Shelby, 16 years old. She had hunted up my number all on her own. She said, in the smallest voice, Grandma, I wanted to know you. Mom and Dad don't have to be any part of it. I just remember the cottonwoods, and I remember you let Bryce ring the dinner bell. And I wanted to know you before, before there's no time. I had to sit myself down on the kitchen floor right there, 64 years old, with the telephone pressed against my face and my back against the cabinet. She comes now. She drives the 2 hours by herself, gas money out of her own job, and she sits with me on my sunset porch and asks me about her granddad, Cal, and about bus number 7, and about who Maybelle was before she was ever anybody's disappointment. I spent 30 years getting other people's children safely home through the cold and the dark. I never once thought one of my very own would have to find her own way back to me, against the current, with nobody holding the map. But she did. You can grow a hard shell over a child's good heart, given enough years and enough wrong reasons. But you cannot kill the thing underneath. Given time, it remembers the road. So here is what I'll leave you with, and then I'll let you get on back to your evening. I knew that morning by the for sale sign which sound my son was making. Glad to see you, or want something. And I turned out to be right. And being right cost me more than being wrong ever could have. But knowing is still better than hoping in the dark, every time, no matter the price on the tag. So love your people freely, with both hands. Give it away like the well will never run dry, because mostly it won't. But do not ever, at any age, in any amount of loneliness, let a soul convince you that being lonesome means you have got to be a fool. You are allowed to keep your heart wide open and both your eyes open at the very same time. I learned how. It is the hardest thing I know how to do. And it is the one thing that saved me. If you rode all the way to the end of this one with me, then you are awful good company on a quiet night. And I thank you kindly for it. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and tell me this one thing. Would you have opened the door after 15 years of silence? I believe you would have. I believe that is just the kind of heart you were given. Stay on the line a while longer, and I will tell you another. The coffee's already on.